Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So, as it is Monday today, it is another sketchbook session. Now, granted, I did do a little bit more, I feel like traditional art as of recently, just because of the kind of mood that I was in was more geared towards like traditional inking, just to kind of prep myself for Inktober, which is going to be happening very, very soon. I still do not know exactly what I want to do, but for today's session, because I also didn't know exactly what I wanted to draw for today, I ended up just scribbling a few of my OCs, and I mean a few, I mean two of my OCs. We are going to be doing like a spread and a half for today's session. So first kind of section is going to be the main bulk of the video, and I just really wanted to see if I could paint with watercolors on this particular paper. So while I'm sketching out my OC Kaisen, I'm going to preface this video a little bit. So as of today, I actually realized that I don't think I've really talked about Patreon all too much, so I'll be sure to start linking it in the description if you're ever interested in my sticker club. But to kind of continue with the Patreon talk, unfortunately Canada Post currently is on strike once again, so because of that there is going to be some sort of either delay and or disruptions in terms of sending out letter mail. So in the past, at least like when the tariff things were happening, I was already pushing back a lot of my priority on opening up Patreon, so I'm a little bit bummed out the fact that I won't be able to securely send out your orders right away. I'm gonna try to like gauge the situation a bit to see whether or not I'm able to send things out a bit more safely, because the last thing I want is for you guys to not receive whatever you pledged for, alongside with me having to constantly replace people's like little letter mail. So I'm gonna see what happens. I'm gonna try my best to keep you guys posted to see whether or not there will be a kind of like a go-ahead in terms of sending those out. But also, thank you for everyone for your patience. I am going to be packing them as soon as September ends, and then I will, try to see what happens with the Canada Post strike, and I will be able to send them out as soon as possible once it seems safe to do so. But let's talk a little bit more about my sketchbook habit. I was gonna say sketchbooking, but I don't think that's like a term or a word that people use. But basically, I do occasionally treat Monday's videos as kind of a way to force myself to actually work with traditional art at some point, also just to keep up, like I mentioned, kind of like a sketchbook habit. But in previous videos, I mentioned that I didn't really think at this point I want to prioritize something like a sketchbook habit. I just want to be able to have a good relationship with drawing traditionally or drawing in my sketchbook for myself, rather than forcing myself to keep up with too many things all at once. Like if life gets busy, I don't want to force myself to have to draw in my sketchbook, because that should be kind of like lower priority if anything. And I guess like to break the illusion a little bit, it's the fact that I'm able to sometimes have a very good recording session or drawing session drawing in my sketchbook, and maybe I'll do like a couple of spreads and I film everything in one day, and then that's like a video or so for every other week, every week for like all the Mondays or whatever, for maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 consecutive weeks. And then for those 3 to 4 weeks, I don't end up drawing anything in my sketchbook. It just looks like I have, but there's not really any progress made. So it's like not a super accurate representation. And sometimes I do end up doing traditional artwork outside of the sketchbook, or like at least my main sketchbook. I do have like a larger one that sometimes I use for like ASMR videos. So there's kind of like a little bit of traditional art everywhere else, sometimes outside of this particular book. Let's talk a little bit about what I'm drawing today. So Kaisen was kind of the first person that I kind of wanted to draw, and I was in a very like fall autumn kind of mood. It's kind of the point where majority of the trees are kind of a nice goldenish yellow, a little bit of green here and there, so it's very warm feeling outside in terms of like the colors, and it's getting a lot more chillier, which I'm excited about because I love wearing longer sleeves, I like wearing bulkier sweaters, and I always just love kind of like autumn colors for the most part. It's a little bit more earthy, sometimes a little bit more muted, it's kind of on the warmer side, so I definitely have a preference towards that. So for the little drawings for today, I wanted to draw what I would consider more of like their for fall attire. Now these ones are going to be very, very simple. I've drawn Kaisen kind of with just a sweater, but it's like a v-neck sweater with some sort of like t-shirt underneath, and I'm keeping his color palette very similar, so I'm keeping kind of more of like a purpley black instead of like the burgundy maroon color that is usually his undershirt, or not his undershirt, his usual t-shirt. Or is it a t-shirt? No, it's a long sleeve, alongside with like the bigger kind of, is it called a howdy or like a cardigan, whatever you want to call it. So like I mentioned like earlier in the video, I did not really have like a specific plan, so I ended up sketching with the kind of like a red mechanical pencil and then switching over to do a little bit of graphite because I knew I wanted to do a little bit of painting with watercolors just to kind of see how they react on this paper. In the past, like I've used similar sketchbooks from this artist and some other artists that I think might share the same manufacturer, or at least like the same paper type for these particular sketchbooks. And I have a very vague idea on how the kind of like watercolors work on this particular paper. And the funny thing is, now that I've had issues with my previous watercolor block, where the sizing wasn't really reacting well because I did not know that watercolor paper can technically expire because of the sizing. And because of that, you sometimes get these little blotches on your watercolor paper that doesn't absorb the paint or spread the kind of paint around in the same way as the rest of the paper. And I noticed that the texture on this particular paper where the paint dries is actually the exact same. So I'm kind of glad that I am able to recognize that when the sizing expires, it kind of reacts as just normal drawing paper for the most part, which is what we have in this particular sketchbook. And I actually really do like this texture, and the watercolor doesn't really like feather or bleed all too much. So I am able to get a fairly okay application of like some flat areas, a little bit of texture if you want to. I can build up color and like kind of not need to worry too much about lifting the paint. But one thing I do like to do afterwards is add some kind of line work after, and I didn't really want to do it with the brush, so I ended up using the Pentel RSVP ballpoint pen to do quick line art. And then after that, I noticed that he looked a little bit too pale, or at least look a little bit too washed out. So I ended up going back in, warming up his skin tone just a smidge, and adding a little bit more shadows before we move on to our next little sketch. Now I don't know exactly when I'm gonna have time because I've been doing more digital work as of lately because I'm in the kind of like merch grind at the moment because I have an upcoming one-day convention in my city. So because of that, I do like to try my best to kind of make as much stuff as possible up until somewhat of a reasonable time before the convention. So the convention, I think this time's on Sunday, if not Saturday. And I would pick maybe like a day or two beforehand where I would halt making any more designs. And then hopefully 3 days beforehand, no, I'm doing this backwards. 3 days beforehand, hopefully I'll halt and like stop all designing of like stickers, most likely prints and all of that, and actually start doing the bulk printing, which hopefully, if I'm smart, I will do this a little bit more in advance because oftentimes 2 days is not enough for me to restock. Granted, this is a one-day convention and I do have a lot of stock from the one that I did, I think back in May. So, oh, here's a little bit behind the scenes, by the way. I actually still haven't unpacked my suitcases from May. And I think partially it was because I had to go on 2 family trips kind of since May until now, and I've just had no energy to really want to like sort everything out. So I will have to do that eventually, and hopefully I will be smart about it and do it a lot earlier while I'm doing the printing so that I can get a general idea of my setup. Because there's a lot of like of my old prints that I want to retire, and I have a few new prints that I want to do kind of like a replacement for, but I think there's a lot more retired prints compared to the replacement, so I'm going to have a lot more space in terms of my general print display, which I might be able to expand a more sticker display room a little bit, but I might have to do it the same way where you have to like request the character rather than doing the self-serve method if I want to utilize my display space for like more vertical rather than like my table space. Also, for the sketch of Masaki, who's the character that I'm drawing right now, he's gonna look very weird. I don't know if I was just not really feeling it. Unfortunately, it does happen quite a bit when I'm recording videos, when I'm working on traditional art, that if something goes wrong closer to the beginning, it does demotivate me a little bit more because traditional art is a little bit more permanent in a sense. But luckily, even though I didn't like my sketch at like this point, I will be able to kind of correct and fix it. I do realize like part of me not liking my sketch at this point was because of the size of Masaki's eyes, and then the size discrepancy between the two irises looked a little bit funny, and it's just the way that I painted in the green iris part, and then I tried to correct it at the very top near, I don't know, his like eyeline area to see if I could even it out. And then in that case, I ended up just calling it quits with the painting, so that once everything dried super quickly, I went ahead and started to try my best to correct everything by using the ballpoint pen to hopefully give enough contrast to correct the size of his irises. So Masaki didn't really turn out to be my favorite from these sketches, and I always feel bad because Masaki, at least more recently, I feel like I've been drawing him very derpy, and maybe it's because I've been drawing him more quickly. I want to do like a spread where I actually take my time. I've definitely been drawing Selwyn a lot more compared to the rest of my OCs because I do want to prep, or at least think about how exactly I want to make his little reference sheet. I'm probably going to do the same format like the rest of my OCs, but I'm still just not sold completely on his design. I think the general like shape, the color, and the design of his entire aesthetic is fine. I kind of want to add little bits and bobs of little details or accessories, and I think it might be because I've been drawing so much VTuber fan art as of recently that I'm always in awe of like all their design choices or like outfits or like accessories, the color combinations, all of that. And because Selwyn's supposed to be the embodiment of everything I like about like certain characters and stuff, and he's supposed to be like kind of like the comfort character, the one that I want to draw very easily and often, which technically he has been fulfilling that role because I've been drawing him a heck of a lot and I've been having fun drawing him. Even kind of like the ideation stage where I ended up just scribbling on a spread in my sketchbook about like ideas that I want to see whether or not I can make it work out. But it requires me probably to plan it a little bit digitally so I can finagle with some of the colors or accessory placement. That way I can kind of move the stuff a little bit more freely and play around with any like accent colors rather than relying on low-key imagination while working on it traditionally, because I'm not going to get like super accurate colors or super accurate placement without having to finagle my way redrawing it over and over again, which could be like a very good way if you want to like solidify the character in your brain though. But as for Masaki, I've always drawn him with kind of like this beige cardigan and a kind of more evergreen, dark green, forest green, whatever you want to call it, turtleneck for kind of his fall attire, and sometimes reaching into more of like the winter, so just like any of the colder months. And to kind of like tie everything together and kind of like the reasoning why I wanted to draw some fall or autumn-esque outfits. It's not even outfits at this point, it's literally just two headshots of my two OCs in more of like colder winter fall attire. But I love fall so much. The golden leaves and just kind of like the cold crisp air, but like everything just looks so warm and cozy. So I wanted to add a little bit of like that orangey kind of golden yellowish color into the background in kind of like a very splotchy way, kind of reminiscent of leaves a little bit. Not really, but it was still kind of fun to add a little bit of pop of color into the back rather than just having the two boys right here. But after that, we are going to be moving on. Like I mentioned earlier, I did end up doing kind of like a spread and a half, and I think it was because I just had a little bit more energy and I kind of wanted to sketch a little bit more. Granted, I could make do without this sketch, to be honest, or like both of these sketches. I think they still turned out cute, but they were kind of like not necessary, if that makes sense in any kind of way. But to kind of like even out my sketchbook, I've done this like a few times before. I'm adding like a little coaster type of thing, a wooden coaster that's a pretty good thickness. So when I press down my sketchbook on the left hand side, the cover doesn't sink all the way diagonally towards my table. I can kind of let it almost lay flat with the help of that coaster. Otherwise, like I've done the method of just like stacking a bunch of sticky notes to kind of make it a little bit more even. You can also use like a thinner book, whatever works for you. I just find it easier to work on a flatter surface rather than on like the angle of my sketchbook due to kind of like the page discrepancies on each side. But for the sketches, so I ended up wanting to see if I could do another session with the watercolors again, but like doing chibi versions of both Masaki and Kaisen. Now, I accidentally drew Kaisen a little bit too low on the page, so his leg almost gets cut off. I think I don't really fill that in, so maybe I do leave it cut off. But because I guess like my mood shifted quite easily when I was doing this session, that I ended up not really wanting to do any more watercolor painting or washes anymore. I ended up just going ahead, switching to the Energel CLENA and just doing a little bit of inking on top. This is also just probably my brain itching to do a little bit more inking in hopes that I figure out what I want to do for Inktober. I know a lot of you guys have mentioned that you're also doing Inktober or OC-tober, so I'm excited to hear from you guys once the kind of month of October actually starts, to see what kind of theme or whatever you end up doing for this particular month, because I don't know, I'm still super indecisive. I think because Inktober or OC-tober or whatever monthly challenge I end up doing for October, I'm just thinking realistically, would it be easier for me to do maybe a larger piece and maybe it'll be like a traditional piece every week instead? So I'm only really, let me see how many Mondays are in October actually. I was kind of seeing, let's see, there's only 4 Mondays. I'm trying to see if I should do like a weekly illustration of some sort. Maybe majority of it will be like some sort of inking material, and then I'll just do that for every Monday of October. But I also don't know. I don't know. You guys can leave me suggestions if you would like. I'm drawn towards doing Inktober, but also like OC-tober together, just to force myself to use more inking or some sort of like traditional medium at that point. Or do I just draw Selwyn? Do I draw Selwyn for each week and I'll just do some sort of watercolor painting? And if I can, I'll see if I can do like a stream for it. Maybe that's what I'll end up doing instead. And maybe I'll do like little tiny post-it note ink doodles for every day instead. And then I just have to commit to one larger watercolor painting. Even though this seems like it's more work, we'll see what happens. I think I'm gravitating towards that now. But that's kind of like today's little sketchbook session. I apologize that it was much more rambly than usual. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's session, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!